You know that feeling when you're checking out online, maybe you're eyeing, I don't know, a new pair of sneakers or just restocking some essentials, and you see that little button?
Oh,
The
yeah.
one that sort of whispers, hey, don't pay the full $100 now.
Just pay 25 today.
Exactly. It started as like a novelty, right? A little button on a fashion site.
Yeah.
But looking around today, on February 10th, 2026, that button has basically eaten the world. We are talking, of course, about buy now, pay later.
It really has. I mean, it's transformed from this niche fintech disruption into a massive pillar of the global financial architecture. It's not just about sneakers anymore. It is reshaping how people get healthcare, how they travel, and maybe most concerningly, how they put food on the table.
That's exactly what we're digging into today. We have a huge stack of reports here. Data from the Motley Fool, Fortune Business Insights, the CFPB, regulatory updates from the UK, the EU. But the mission for this deep dive isn't just to throw numbers at you. We need to figure out if this is actually a tool for financial empowerment, a way to stick it to the credit card companies, or if we are staring at a massive phantom debt trap that is about to snap shut on millions of people.
It's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? And the landscape has shifted so dramatically, even just in the last 12 months. We are seeing a regulatory watershed moment right now in 2026.
And the usage numbers are?
They're staggering.
So let's start there with those numbers. Because staggering feels like an understatement, but it's also, a bit abstract. I was reading the Fortune Business Insights report, and the scale is just hard to wrap your head around.
It is. Let's just look at the trajectory. If we look back at 2025, so just last year, the global market size was valued at, around almost $45 billion.
Okay, $45 billion.
But the projections, and this is the wild part, they're pointing toward over $286 billion by 2034.
Whoa, okay, hold on. $45 billion to nearly $300 billion. I mean, that sounds like a lot, but give me some context. How does that compare to, say, regular credit card growth?
Right, and that is the key context. That represents a compound annual growth rate, a KGR of about 23%.
23%.
To put that in perspective, traditional credit lending, it usually grows in line with GDP, maybe 2–3% a year.
So BNPL is growing 10 times faster than the economy itself.
Exactly. That's not normal organic growth. That is an explosion. It suggests a really fundamental shift in how money is moving around the world.
So it's not a trend, it's a migration.
Yeah.
And that's just the market valuation of the companies, the actual amount of stuff people are buying, the gross merchandise volume. That's even crazier, right?
Right. GMV is just a fancy way of saying the total price tag of everything bought through these buttons. In 2025 alone, the global GMV via BNPL hit $560 billion.
$560 billion.
And we are looking at a user base that's projected to surpass 900 million people by 2027.
900 million. That is almost the population of the entire Americas. So who are these people? I feel like the stereotype is still, the broke college kid trying to look cool on Instagram. Is that actually who's driving this $500 billion economy?
It's partially accurate, but the picture is getting much more complex. Gen Z and millennials are definitely the power users. In 2025, nearly 60% of those groups were using BNPL.
60%. Okay.
In the U.S. specifically, Gen Z adoption is doubling. It's sitting at around 46%.
Okay, so the younger generation is locked in. That tracks with the whole digital native idea.
They are. But here is where it gets surprising. Boomers are joining the party. Depending on which data slice you look at, boomer usage is between 11 and 37%.
Wait, I have to push back on that a bit. Why would a boomer use this?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, that demographic has more wealth, higher credit limits, actual credit cards.
Right.
Why bother splitting a $500 fridge payment into 4 chunks? Is it savvy management, or is there a hidden liquidity issue even for older generations?
That's a great question. The industry spin is that boomers are financially savvy, and they're using it as a cash flow management tool.
Right, keep their money in a high-yield savings account for an extra 6 weeks, pay 0 interest.
And for some, that's true. They are using it because they can, not because they have to.
But there's a but.
But for others, it's about credit aversion. Remember, a lot of people, regardless of age, still have scars from old financial crises, or they just hate the idea of paying 25% APR on a credit card. About 41% of users specifically choose BNPL to avoid credit card interest.
So it's seen as safer, more predictable.
Exactly. 55% of Gen Z actually believe it helps them manage their finances better.
Believes. being the operative word there. Because if you're splitting a payment to manage finances, aren't you just pushing the pain into next month? I mean, we're going to get to the delinquency stats later, and they don't exactly scream good management.
And that's the disconnect. There is a massive gap between the perception of financial control, I only paid 25 bucks today, and the reality of debt accumulation.
Okay, so let's unpack this shift in what people are buying, because this is the part of the reports that really stood out to me, and frankly, it worried me. We aren't just financing Peloton bikes anymore.
No, not at all. We are witnessing a structural shift to essentials. And this is where the economic signal gets alarming. According to the data, 31% of users are now using BNPL for groceries
Grocery.
and 29% for food delivery services.
Stop there for a second. A third of users are financing their groceries. I want to understand the economics of that. If I buy an apple, I eat it today. It's gone. If I'm still paying for that apple in 6 weeks, isn't that a classic debt trap?
It is the definition of a mismatch. You are financing immediate consumption with future income. It signals that for a significant chunk of the population, BNPL has evolved into a paycheck bridge. About 33% of users admit they use it to bridge the gap between paychecks.
It's working capital for households.
It is. You aren't buying a luxury. You are smoothing out your cash flow just to eat.
That's a heavy realization. It's not buy now, pay later. It's eat now, pay later. But why do the retailers allow this? If I'm a supermarket, do I really want my customers paying in installments?
Oh, the retailers love it. You have to look at the basket size. The data shows that when BNPL is available, basket sizes increase by up to 72% for omnichannel users.
72%.
If you tell a shopper they can pay later, they don't just buy the bread and milk, they buy the expensive steak and the fancy cheese. It decouples the pleasure of buying from the pain of paying.
So the retailer gets a bigger sale, the BNPL firm gets a fee, and the consumer gets a bill for a steak they ate last month.
Precisely. And it's expanding beyond food. Healthcare, BNPL financing, dental work, elective procedures, even vet bills is growing at nearly 20% annually.
Wow.
And travel bookings via BNPL, they jumped 289% in 2024.
Fly now, pay later.
Yes, but think about the hangover. You go on vacation, you come back, the tan fades, you're back at work. And you are still making payments on that margarita you drank in Cancun 3 months ago?
It changes the whole psychology of consumption. It creates this permanent drag on your future income.
It does.
Okay, so we have massive scale, and we have a shift toward financing everyday survival. Now we have to talk about the dark side, because you can't have this much lending, especially to young people, without some friction.
And the friction is definitely heating up. We're seeing a significant rise in late payments. In 2025, around 41 to 42% of BNPL users reported being late on a payment.
42%, that's almost half. That seems incredibly high compared to credit cards.
It is significantly higher. And if you look at Gen Z specifically, those rates are hitting anywhere from 39 to 51%.
So the generation that says this helps them manage their finances is defaulting half the time. How is that even possible? Are the banks or these fintechs not checking to see if these kids have money?
Well, this brings us to the core mechanical flaw in the system, something called loan stacking.
Loan stacking. I've heard the term. Explain how it actually works in practice.
Think of it as a blind spot in the system. If you apply for a Visa card, American Express knows about it almost instantly because they both check the same central credit bureaus.
Right.
But until very recently, BNPL lenders were operating in silos. They didn't talk to each other.
So, practically speaking.
Practically speaking, a consumer could open 3 browser tabs, one for Klarna, one for Afterpay, one for Affirm. They could hit buy on 3 different items at the exact same moment.
And Klarna doesn't know about the Afterpay loan. Afterpay doesn't know about the Affirm loan.
Exactly. It's algorithmic arbitrage. The data shows 63% of users are juggling multiple active loans at once. 23% have 3 or more.
And the algorithms are just making approval decisions on incomplete data?
They see a user who looks fine, but in reality, that user is already over-leveraged across 5 other apps.
Which brings us to that term that keeps popping up in the regulatory papers. Phantom debt.
Right. For years, this debt was invisible. It wasn't reported to the major credit bureaus. So a mortgage broker looking at your application wouldn't see that you owe $500 across 4 different apps.
It created a hidden layer of consumer leverage.
A phantom debt that regulators and other lenders just couldn't see.
Which explains the regret stats. I saw that 26% of users regret using the service once they realize the total costs. But does phantom debt actually matter if the bank can't see it?
It matters immensely because it distorts the entire picture of the economy. If banks think consumers are healthy because they aren't carrying credit card debt, but those same consumers are drowning in BNPL payments, the banks are making risk decisions based on false information.
And for the consumer, it just encourages overspending.
Right. Nearly half say it causes them to impulse buy.
So the Wild West era of invisible debt and unchecked stacking seems to be hitting a wall. And that wall is regulation. The sources say 2026 is the year the rules change, but it seems like different countries are handling this very differently.
It's a patchwork, but a coordinated one. We are in the middle of a regulatory watershed. If we look at the United Kingdom, they have circled July 15th, 2026 on the calendar. That is the FCA's Regulation Day.
What happens on Regulation Day? Is it a total crackdown?
Basically, interest-free credit becomes legally regulated. Lenders will be required to perform creditworthiness checks for every single transaction.
Even for like a 40-pound sweater.
Even those under 50 pounds, yes.
That kind of kills the instant part of instant gratification, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
If I have to wait for a credit check to buy a t-shirt?
It adds friction, yes. But the regulator's argument is that you should have friction before taking on debt. The European Union is right behind them. Their Consumer Credit Directive, TIEACCD, comes into full force by November 20th, 2026.
And what does that do?
It removes the thresholds, meaning all those microloans are now fully regulated to prevent what they call regulatory arbitrage.
Regulatory arbitrage. Define that for us.
Sure. Think of a balloon. If you squeeze it in one place, say, by regulating loans over $100, the air just moves to the unregulated part, the loans under $100.
So companies just tweak their products to sit right outside the rules?
Exactly. CCD2 is essentially saying, no more loopholes. If you lend money, you follow the rules, period.
Okay, so Europe is locking it down. Now, bring it home to the U.S. We usually do things a bit differently. I remember hearing about the CFPB calling these guys credit card providers back in 2024. What's the status now?
It's messy. It's a bit of a pendulum swing. The CFPB did issue that interpretive rule in 24, essentially saying, if it looks like a credit card and acts like a credit card, you have to give people the same rights, disputes, refunds, statements.
That seems logical.
It is, but as we moved into 2025 and now 2026, there has been some flip-flopping. There's talk of a potential rescission or just a lack of enforcement under new leadership.
It's a fintech lobby.
The U.S. has a very strong fintech lobby, and they argue that treating them like banks stifles innovation.
So are they regulated or not?
It's murky. The federal rule is in limbo, so we are seeing state-level action, like in New York, trying to fill the gap. But honestly, the biggest regulator might actually be the market itself. 2026 is the year FICO and VantageScore are formally integrating BNPL data into credit scores.
So the phantom becomes visible. The Ghostbusters have arrived.
Exactly. And this is the gotcha moment for all those users. If you have a history of stacking microloans or missing payments on those groceries, it is going to show up. It could hurt consumers looking for mortgages.
Wait, play that out. If I'm 25 and I've been using BNPL for 5 years responsibly, does this help me? Or does having 50 small loans on my record look bad to a bank?
That is the debate. Ideally, it builds a thick credit file. But some mortgage models view loan stacking, even if paid on time, as a sign of financial distress. It implies you don't have cash on hand. So the days of invisible debt are over, and the consequences are just starting.
That changes the whole value proposition. If it hits my credit report, I might as well just use my credit card, right? I get points with my credit card. I get nothing with BNPL.
That is exactly what the big banks are banking on.
Pun intended.
Always. But seriously, we are seeing a massive convergence. It's not just startups anymore. Traditional banks have realized they were losing market share, so they are fighting back.
Right, you've got American Express with Planet, Chase, Citi.
And they're embedding these installment options directly into their existing cards. They just swallowed the feature.
And they have a huge advantage. They already know your credit history.
Exactly. They can raise your credit limit, potentially by huge margins, and keep you inside their ecosystem. They don't need a new check. They just toggle a switch.
So where does that leave the OGs, the Klarnas and Affirms? If Chase can do what they do, but better and safer, do the startups die?
They have to evolve or die. Klarna is pivoting hard. They aren't just a payment button anymore. They are positioning themselves as an AI-powered digital bank. They had their IPO in 2025.
Right.
And they are boasting about efficiency revenue per employee tripled because of AI.
Let's talk about that AI angle, because when I hear AI underwriting, I hear a robot is deciding if I can eat. How is that different from a FICO score?
A FICO score looks at your past. what you paid, what you owe. AI underwriting tries to predict your future. It looks at thousands of data points: what time of day you shop, what device you use, how fast you type, your return history. It builds a behavioral profile.
That sounds intrusive.
It is, but it allows them to approve people who might have a thin credit file but are actually good risks. The risk, however, is that AI makes it too easy. It removes the friction.
And if the AI is too good at predicting you will pay, it might just offer you a loan at the exact moment your willpower is lowest.
That's the fear. Predatory lending, just automated.
A firm is taking a different route, though, right?
Yes, a firm is moving toward profitability and longer-term interest-bearing loans. They are moving away from just the pay-in-4 model and becoming more of a traditional lender, just with better tech.
And then you have the giants, Apple Pay and PayPal.
They're just naturally capturing a huge slice of this market because of their digital wallet dominance.
It feels like the industry is maturing very, very quickly. It went from a feature to a sector, and now it's just banking. Just faster, weirder banking.
That is the inevitable cycle of fintech. Disruption becomes adoption, which becomes integration.
So let's try to summarize this for everyone listening. We have a commerce engine that increases basket sizes by up to 72%. It's a liquidity tool for people buying groceries, but it carries the systemic risk of invisible debt and high delinquency, especially among the young.
That's the core tension. It's a powerful tool for commerce, but a dangerous one for the consumer who isn't careful. And as we move through 2026, the veil of secrecy is lifting.
And the practical takeaway here, if you're listening to this and you love hitting that pay later button,
The takeaway is that the interest-free pitch is seductive, but the data integration in 2026 means the free ride on anonymity is over. These small decisions, splitting a $50 purchase, now have big consequences for your future borrowing power.
so if you want a mortgage in 5 years, how you handle your BNPL loans today matters.
You need to treat them with the same seriousness as a car loan. It's no longer just between you and the app. It's between you, the app, and your permanent record.
Exactly. I want to leave everyone with a thought to chew on. We talked about how 31% of people are financing groceries and how AI is driving all this. So if we are using the most advanced artificial intelligence in human history to help people pay for eggs in 4 installments, are we looking at a financial revolution, or is this just a rebranding of economic fragility?
And with AI making it easier to approve these loans instantly, are we automating financial inclusion, or are we just automating over-indebtedness?
That is the question we will be watching for the rest of 2026.
Absolutely.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you on the next one.